They take off in waves. They begin a kamikaze spree that dwarfs anything before or since.
On the afternoon of June 4th, the Japanese fleet at Midway is down, but not out. One carrier, the Hiryu, remains unscathed. It fires off a counterattack.
And they all ganged up on the Yorktown.
Japanese planes scream in at one American carrier, the USS Yorktown. Japan is still fighting for its plan to invade Midway, if they can knock out some American carriers. Through the maelstrom, 3 bombs hit the Yorktown.
The damage is not enough to sink the Yorktown, though it develops a list, that is a tilt of about 30 degrees to one side. But the other 2 carriers, USS Hornet and USS Enterprise, are still perfectly capable of retaliating.
They cobble together an attack force from pilots and planes who survived the morning, including Dusty.
Everyone was champing at the bit to get airborne again.
The torpedo bombers can't go at all because they've all been shot down. They're going to go with only the dive bombers.
Each fleet now knows where the other is. They're battling in broad daylight. But the dauntless dive bombers use daylight to their advantage.
They are flying out of the sun. So when you're looking up from a Japanese ship, you can't see the planes coming out of the sun. It's a perfect position. They start to dive on the Hiryu, and at that moment, the Hiryu makes a radical turn to the left.
2 bombers diving ahead of Dusty miss the rapidly turning carrier. But Dusty recalibrates his Dauntless on the fly.
As I plunged toward the sea, I aimed for where the ship was going to be as it continued that turn.
At 1,500 feet, he yanks the bomb release lever.
He's an incredible pilot to be able to kind of maneuver himself while he's diving to be able to hit that ship and gain his second hit of the day.
Americans wreck 4 Japanese carriers in a single day. They turn Japan's ambush on its head.
You only get a few shots of looking through a periscope. What you do is you make a guess as to where the target is and how fast it's going and what direction. Takes a quick look around with a periscope. It'll be supplemented by other things, but it's really all on his shoulders.
Distance 2,200 yards and decreasing.
O'Kane calls the destroyer's range. Morton plots the attack.
Fire 3. 3 firing.
As he fires 3 torpedoes, it costs Morton an eighth of Wahoo's ordnance, but increases the odds he'll sink the target before it sinks him. When the first 3 torpedoes miss, Morton increases the destroyer's speed in his calculation to 20 knots and fires. They miss again. Wahoo has expended its ammunition to no avail. Worse, they have drawn the attention of the sub-destroyer.
You're a submarine officer. As long as you're submerged, not bothering anybody, you're invisible and you're safe. Every time you fire a torpedo, if it's visible, that gives the other side an incentive to get you.
But Morton does not attempt to dive into darkness. He leaves the periscope up, announcing Wahoo's exact position. He has just 2 more torpedoes loaded in the forward tubes. The destroyer charges. Ramming a submarine to damage its hull is a crude but effective tactic. For Wahoo, The close proximity leaves no time to evade if its torpedoes miss. The only option left is an extremely risky shot. Sailors call it down the throat. Morton aims a shot straight at the ship's narrow bow.
He has no other option. If he doesn't, the destroyer has all the speed and maneuverability to pound him into the silt, and there's nothing he can do about it. So he's forcing him to attack and trying to change the attack into a situation where he can have the advantage.
As the destroyer closes in, Morton's timing has to be perfect. If they fire for more than 1,200 yards, the destroyer has time to evade. But within 700 yards, the torpedo won't have time to arm and detonate.
I fired 2.
They release 2 torpedoes. The first flies wide. The skipper and his crew must wait and hope the second torpedo finds its mark. Less than a minute after the previous shot flies wide, the second torpedo to fire, down the throat, lands a direct hit. The blow cripples the destroyer's hull.
We got a hit.
Wahoo plunges deep under the damaged ship to avoid a collision and escape the carnage.
It's Easter Sunday. The military calls it L-Day. Many think it might be their last day on Earth. The morning light reveals a stunning sight. The largest amphibious assault ever mounted in World War II's Pacific Theater. 1,500 ships, 500,000 men. Many had never even heard of Okinawa. They had heard of Normandy, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, where the enemy had mowed down Americans by the thousands as they came ashore. Their briefing was matter of fact and frightening. Expect dug-in defenses on the hills above the beaches. Expect a storm of repelling firepower. Expect an 80% casualty rate. Americans have limited intelligence going in. Aerial reconnaissance is lacking. Maps are inaccurate. They can only guess at what lies ahead. The Japanese consider Okinawa home turf. They are preparing to defend it with more than 100,000 men and a fanatical devotion to their cause. They won't let the Americans in without a fight. On April 1st, the invasion starts. But instead of enemy fire, they meet an eerie silence. They move cautiously, expecting a trap. But there's no sign of the enemy. Word gets back to the fleet. There is no one to fight. Subsequent waves of troops come ashore. They calmly grab their gear and walk upright onto the beach. Within hours, thousands of men unload a city's worth of infrastructure onto the beaches of Okinawa. Many keep their guns stowed and never have to dig a foxhole. Instead of the Japanese army, Americans find only civilians. Okinawans are an isolated people. Mainland Japanese consider them inferior, little more than rustic peasants. But they have stories to tell. Stories of terrifying propaganda commanding them to avoid capture at all costs. Stories of Okinawan boys taken and forced into military service. Stories that reveal the Japanese army is out there. Somewhere.
Easy Company's mission into the heart of occupied Normandy is not off to a good start. The Nazis have been expecting an invasion for months, and they are letting the aircraft carrying the Screaming Eagles have it. As they near the drop zone, Easy Company prepares to make their jump. Second in command of a platoon and about to make his first ever combat jump is 22-year-old Second Lieutenant Buck Compton.
A heavy cable ran down the ceiling of the inside, front to back. Just before we were to jump, we'd clamp ourselves into that cable, which would pull our chutes from their bags once we jumped. There was no singing, no patriotic talk. Adrenaline surged, but I didn't feel nervous. This was what we'd signed up to do.
Easy Company's advanced parachute training took place at Fort Benning, Georgia. In order to finally qualify as a paratrooper, the men had to make 5 live jumps carrying all their gear. Most of the paratroopers carry their heavy equipment in a bag strapped to their leg.
So the system set up here is that I have a leg bag here attached to a strap on the harness. And what I would do is, as I'm coming into land, about 150 feet up, I'm gonna bring my leg up to release the straps, and then I'm gonna kick the bag down onto my boot. And when I'm ready, I'll kick the bag off, and now I'm free to come in without all of my kit and hopefully do a safe parachute landing.
Under the right conditions, this tried and tested method is the best way to drop into battle with a lot of gear. For Easy Company, things aren't going according to plan. Still under heavy fire, the inexperienced C-47 pilots react instinctively to avoid being shot out of the sky. They open up their throttles.
The pilots were supposed to slow to almost a stall so we could jump out. But our pilot didn't slow at all. I can only assume he was in a real hurry to get out of there.
Easy Company's men are given the signal to jump. But they're traveling way too fast.
As soon as I jumped and felt the opening shock, the straps holding the bag flew off over my boot. The cord attached to the bag began to feed out so fast I couldn't hold it. It was burning my hands, so I let go. The bag disappeared into the night. Strapped to my belt were a trench knife and a canteen. With my leg bag gone, those were the only supplies I had.
And right behind him is 21-year-old Sergeant Bill Ganier.
Making it through the jump alive was a feat. Your heart's pounding, the sky's chaos. The planes are dumping men from Cherbourg all the way to Paris. All in the wrong places. Thousands of troopers coming down from the sky. It was like a duck shoot for the Krauts.
In the first combined air, land, and sea raid of its kind, the British Commando forces have captured the Norwegian island of Malloy. But now, they are under heavy German fire on the nearby island of Bogso. After multiple losses, reinforcements have been called in. But the enemy is defending with everything they've got. Now the commandos are pinned down. Their lives hang in the balance.
When you're pinned down under heavy fire, doing the unthinkable is often the only way out. Attack can be the best form of defense. Therefore, they decide to charge into the line of fire and take the sniper out.
Now, they must put their courage to the test. Lieutenant Colonel Durnford Slater's men aim at the sniper, giving covering fire, while Captain Young leads a charge across open ground. Remarkably, they make it to the outer wall of the warehouse with no casualties. They need to clear it, but they don't know how many Germans are inside. Captain Young is working out their options, but 2 of his commandos are tired of waiting.
While I was organizing, Dennis O'Flaherty, exasperated by the prolonged resistance, assaulted the front door. Sherrington, who was full of dash, sprang in behind him.
Peter Young feels compelled to protect his men. He has no choice but to follow them into the warehouse.
This was no part of my plan, but I felt I had to go too. I had reached the bottom of the stairs when there were 2 shots.
I heard a shot, and as my companion fell, I was thrown to my knees against the outside wall by a blow on my head. When I had stopped seeing stars and got up and picked up my gun, I saw a figure in the door, and he fired.
O'Flaherty and Sherrington are badly shot up.
How the hell were we to rescue them? They were both lying in the middle of the room, covered by an invisible enemy lurking in the darkness of an inner doorway, not 5 yards away.
Although unconscious and bleeding heavily, O'Flaherty and Sherrington are still alive.
I sat up against the wall and saw the 2 Germans near me, ignoring me but peering through a window. I heaved myself up and together with Sherrington walked out.
O'Flaherty has been shot in the face. 1 bullet in his eye, 2 bullets in his jaw and neck. It's not surprising the Germans think he's dead. Fortunately, while the Nazis are preoccupied with troops outside the warehouse, O'Flaherty and Sherrington have simply scrambled to their feet and walked out.
By the 3rd day of the invasion of Okinawa, there is still no sign of the enemy. Commanding General Simon Buckner sends a message to the Marines.
All restrictions removed on your advance northward.
Men and materiel move up the island and into the Motobu Peninsula, a mountainous no man's land. They approach a high, craggy mass called Mount Yetake. Suddenly, fire comes from everywhere. Americans are pinned down by mortars and machine guns no matter where they go. Companies get split up running for cover. They barely know where to return fire. After days of easy and rapid advance, casualties pile up by the hundreds.
That was an old artillery training ground, Okinawa, and they knew every foot of the island. They could drop a shell any place they saw us.
After almost a week of uphill fighting, there is little to show for it, except for blood and bandages. The Japanese have the advantage. In the midst of this nightmare, news reaches the front lines. On Mount Yetake, officers rally the troops with a new strategy. Attack from 2 directions, pinch them into a high, tight spot, then use air and artillery strikes to pummel the 1,200-foot mountaintop. It's an uphill slog against what one officer calls a phantom enemy. For 4 more days, they slowly move up the mountain under withering fire. Then, Marines finally take the top of Mount Yatake and take a look around. 2,000 Japanese bodies litter the peaks, trenches, and tunnels. Almost to a man, they had fought to the death. This one mountaintop cost the Marines almost 1,000 men. It was their first test against the Japanese defenses on Okinawa, and they wonder if they've only scratched the surface.
In 1942, the Dauntless dive bomber is a newcomer to the Navy, largely untested in battle. Its big moment is coming soon enough.
This SBD-2 Dauntless is special. It is the only known surviving aircraft from the Battle of Midway, and it has battle scars to prove it. Each one of these metal patches here covers the nearly 200 bullet holes that were put in this airplane when it attacked Japanese carriers on the morning of June 4th, 1942.
Rear gunners face backwards, handling .30 caliber machine guns to fend off enemy attacks. In front, pilots control a plane not known for speed, but for precision. Its 1,000-pound bombs aren't just dropped, they're aimed. It's called dive bombing.
The tactic of dive bombing was very important in naval aviation during World War II, and the SBD Dauntless dive bomber was the prime instrument of that. And the theory was, with a ship maneuvering on the surface, you really couldn't drop a bomb from a high altitude.
From 20,000 feet, a carrier is a speck on the ocean. Hitting it with a free-falling bomb is next to impossible. But in a dive, pilots can adjust their aim on the fly and release their bombs at 1,500 feet for a better shot. It's a tactic that takes icy nerves and an iron stomach.
Dive bombing was a death-defying ride of terror. It's basically like a game of chicken that a pilot is playing with the ocean itself. You start at about 20,000 feet, which is about 4 miles above the ocean. A huge ship is going to appear about the size of a ladybug on the tip of a shoe, so it's tiny.
They practice over land targets, plunging into a 70-degree dive.
It is a jarring, noisy, chaotic descent.
They are diving at 275 miles an hour toward their target, keeping an eye on their bomb scope. They're watching their altimeter.
And at the last minute, you grip the bomb release lever on the left side of the cockpit, you jerk it back, you pull back on the stick, and if you're not careful, you can black out because all the blood will be sucked from your head. You get tunnel vision.
Compared to Dusty's dive bombing, Tom Eversolt's torpedo bombing practice is low and slow.
During torpedo drops, it had to fly very low to the water and very slow, just above stalling speed, and therefore made it an easy target for enemy fighter planes.
So torpedo bombers typically go in with fighter cover, even smoke screens, because just one torpedo could sink a ship.
March 17th, 1943. Nazi U-boats have sunk more than a dozen merchant ships, but U-530 is being hunted by an Allied escort.
It's probably like going from positive adrenaline, like you're hunting your prey in the woods, and all of a sudden a bear or a wolf would stand in front of you, and then you have to run away.
But it's U-530's lucky day. HMS Beverly loses contact with the U-boat. When the seas fall silent, the crew jumps into action. Carefully managing their remaining battery power, they ascend in 30-foot intervals.
He has to conserve his battery fuel because he needs it for propulsion. Otherwise, the submarine would sink deeper and deeper.
After the 2-hour attack, Lange's crippled U-boat breaks the surface. Their ordeal is over. They are fortunate to be alive. Additional Allied attacks throughout the day of March 17th forced 12 German U-boats to lose contact with the convoy.
What you're trying to do as the escort commander is to break contact. It's a bonus if you can attack it. It's even better if you can sink it.
Gradually, the scales tip in the Allies' favor. Although U-boats continue to pick away, the two convoys approach the edge of the air gap. Allied aircraft can reach the convoys from Europe. The wolf packs are now also being hunted from the sky. Long-range air patrols, Liberators, Sunderlands, and Fortresses provide cover from the convoy, relieving pressure off the exhausted escorts.
Like the cavalry coming over the hill, the arrival of Coastal Command aircraft alters the situation very significantly. Aircraft can force submarines down. Once submarines are submerged, their mobility is greatly reduced.
A 206 Squadron Flying Fortress flies into a squall astern of the convoy, hoping to catch a U-boat unaware. U-384 doesn't have a chance to dive before 4 depth charges are dropped. Explosions are spotted on either side of the U-boat. U-384 sinks to the ocean floor, taking with it the crew of 47. The Nazis' lethal weapon has become their iron coffin.
A small group of elite American paratroopers are assaulting a gun battery, shelling the troops heading up from Utah Beach. Easy Company has taken the first 2 howitzers, but 2 more guns remain. Outnumbered by the enemy, the unit has just lost Trooper Halls to a German bullet. Easy Company is now low on men and ammunition.
With casualties taken, this could be disastrous for morale. But despite the setback, Easy Company continue their assault.
With sheer guts, Winters and his men storm the 3rd gun. Helpless, the Germans are completely overwhelmed in a hail of bullets. They surrender, and the 3rd howitzer belongs to Easy.
Winters now has to put the 3 guns out of action permanently if the raid is to be successful. The fortunes of war can turn very quickly, and the Germans can't be allowed to take those guns back.
Winters orders TNT and grenades to be stuffed down the barrels of the 105s. It's guaranteed to put these guns out of action for good. 3 howitzers are out of action, but the 4th remains. As long as it stays in German hands, it can threaten the advance inland from Utah Beach. Easy Company is still drawing heavy fire from the Germans. But as any hope of taking the 4th gun dwindles, new blood arrives. Lieutenant Ronald Spears and soldiers from Dog Company move in to reinforce Winters and his unit. Despite enemy fire, Spears begins his run to take the 4th and final howitzer.
Spears went right in to take the 4th gun, and I was so hyped, I followed right behind him, covering him from the rear. Spears was as nutty as I was. He sent the Germans fleeing, and he took the gun, but he lost 2 men.
The Germans make a break across a field to the safety of Breakour Manor. Easy Company has the enemy on the run. Spears' heroics have taken the 4th and final gun.
April 6th dawns quiet in the waters off Okinawa. The calm did not comfort Ensign Doug Aitken.
We knew that we were going to be in for trouble. We just knew it.
On the nearby islands, the Japanese had been gathering every usable plane and pilot remaining in their arsenal. Some are inexperienced, but no less devoted. They call this mission Kikusui, or Floating Chrysanthemum. They take off in waves. They begin a kamikaze spree that dwarfs anything before or since. In the next 2 days, over 350 enemy planes wreak absolute havoc. American pilots try to stop them in roller coaster dogfights. Navy gunners try to derail them in white-knuckle, high-speed combat, sometimes close enough to see each other's faces. General Buckner, an avid hunter, describes the adrenaline rush to his wife.
I have had thrills in duck blinds, but none comparable to that of seeing an enemy plane shot down when it was heading directly at our ship.
Some are cut down, but others get through. For sailors like Doug Aitken, the horror is burned into memory.
And all of a sudden, general quarters, all hands man your battle stations. First of all, power went out. So we opened the doors and we could see all this commotion and all this smoke.
Japan intentionally crashes 1,900 planes in suicide dives around Okinawa, the most intense kamikaze attacks of the entire Pacific campaign. They sink 26 ships and damage 164 more. The Japanese consider it noble sacrifice. The Americans consider it inhumane warfare.
You can't identify people. The right thing to do is bury at sea.
It is the greatest concentration of Navy losses since Pearl Harbor.